On today's episode, John Carroll, Executive Director of City Leadership, a nonprofit that helps recruit and retain talent in Memphis. We'll talk about how City Leadership's mission and work has changed over the years and how they play a role in Memphis's future. All that and more on Champions of the Lost Causes. John, thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marvin. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you as well.
Yes, sir.
So here at the outset, if you could, just tell us what City Leadership's mission and work really is in the briefest sense.
Yeah, so we are a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits. And so we've referred to ourselves sometimes as a consultant, as a collaborator, as a problem solver. But the reality is really what we look to do is we help the good guys do more good. And our organization was created because I really didn't, well, let me say it, at least named, because I didn't think anyone would be really interested in signing up for John Carroll consulting services.
Right.
And the reality is that nonprofits in general don't typically pursue, especially back then, it wasn't very common to pursue or even know how to or even to afford consulting services or to even assume that they would even need them. Right. But the thought was that man, there's all these people who have big hearts, hopeful to make a big difference in whatever they're trying to do. And so how can we help them do more of that faster, quicker, more efficiently in that sort of way? And I thought, man, what if I started an org that served the org that serves everybody?
Yeah. You know, that's interesting because I feel like, I mean, and I'm a 20-year nonprofit pro myself. And I've worked from a small nonprofit, even a grassroots nonprofit, all the way up to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. So I've seen, from a stages of growth perspective, I've seen how you can delineate duties and how budgets can affect all that.
Right.
So it's interesting. Like, what I've observed over doing the show is that most nonprofits have a kind of genesis moment where they say somebody ought to do this, right? And no one's doing it, so someone takes the leadership role to do that. But in your case, City Leadership is really playing a role in helping a lot of other missional objectives be more successful. Who were some of the nonprofits maybe in the mix at the outset, or maybe some that you're working with currently?
Yeah, so I think the nonprofits for us, what we've done, and we've drawn a pretty hard no very early on of anything outside of Memphis.
Right.
But and a lot of those orgs today are related to either teacher recruitment, teacher development, schools, education, mentorship. But typically, we are looking at orgs that are working with children in poverty, and they play some piece of the puzzle or the pie, or however you'd say, in changing that kid's life differently in a positive way. But there's usually no one nonprofit that can handle all of the pivot of a child's life. And so we're typically working with organizations that would work in some aspect of their life from birth or pre-K until high school graduation. And then over time, we've evolved into helping people, kind of post-graduation. And so there's a bunch of organizations locally, whether it's Memphis Teacher Residency or Teach for America or Compass or Grizzlies Prep or Collegiate or New Hope or MAM, Streets, Grizz Foundation, Stacks, all those kind of things. So, we've got a bunch of organizations that have been historically in that process. But the big deal for us wasn't necessarily a specific org or a specific thing. The beginning for us was realizing was that most orgs that could utilize our help, they weren't looking for us, they didn't know that they needed us, because a lot of times they're actually healthy organizations that need to be maximized. They're actually healthy organizations that need to be collaborated and catalyzed with other organizations. And so they're not thinking about the multiplication potential of themselves. Or really, maybe they've got gold and they don't realize it in the sense of something special that they're doing. And so in addition to that, the orgs that might need some help in solving a problem or that kind of stuff, they're not typically pursuing us They're not typically looking for that because they don't have the resources and funding. Like if they had $50,000 extra dollars, they'd be trying to hire another person, not hire a consultant. And so the reason why we structured as a nonprofit was so that we could actually raise money to help other nonprofits for free. And what that does is it allows us to, instead of trying to spend all our time marketing our services to hundreds of orgs, having tons of or dozens of leads come in, and then having to go research those needs, and then figuring out how do we adjust ourselves to whatever their specific needs were, we were able to pivot the whole game. Our funding of our nonprofit allowed us to identify what are problems in our community that we just didn't like, right? We didn't want to be true in our community. And then try to identify what are the root causes of those problems. And then who are the organizations or people that get up every day and try to address those root causes. And then I just went and knocked on those doors, met those people, interviewed them, had lunch, learned about what they were doing, and tried to identify the people and organizations that had the most potential to make the biggest difference, and eliminate people who maybe they had big needs that I had no skill set in. Like there's no sense in me, even taking a phone call from someone who is asking about, whatever, some medical device, something or whatever. Like that's not like, because there's so many different kinds of nonprofits, like that's not really what we do and address. And so, but when we identified that allowed us to go pursue them and then try to maximize that and utilize our time to help solve the problems that we actually were not only passionate about, but skilled in solving. And that was really our strategic advantage. We got up spending more time actually working on problems than trying to recruit clients and hearing about their problems and trying to figure out if we could solve them, which that's what most consultants actually do, or have a whole division of people that do for the actual consultants.
Right. It's interesting. Lots of nonprofits, they usually came into being to address a problem. Take, my old boss, Dr. Scott Morris at Church Health, the working uninsured and their healthcare needs. Now, over the years, that's grown into healthier living stuff, the kind of broader range of health. But I feel like with lots of interventions, there are always connected wraparound services or issues. During my time at Church Health, I learned those are called the social determinants. It's like if educational attainment is a problem, well, it's connected to poverty, it's connected to crime. So it's really interesting to me that essentially, like to recruit and retain and catalyze is one thing, but almost to really take a step back and look at the stages of growth of children and schooling and all that is really the other piece to recruit and retain, and that is to help grow your own, air quotes, right? Can you talk a little bit about how the sub brand of Teach 901 is because that's the thing my mind jumps to after what you just said. Can you talk to me about how that is a part of your work?
Yeah. So at City Leadership, our core tenet is everything rises and falls on leadership. And so how we got, in thinking through that, it is like, if everything rises and falls on leadership, then what really matters right now is who are our leaders now, okay? But when I started City Leadership, I was 32, and I was imagining myself spending the rest of my life in Memphis. I'm not from here. I'd totally fallen in love with the city. I'd been here for 6 years, and I was imagining myself spending the rest of my life in Memphis. And so realizing that every leader that I admired and respected and was making a big impact in our community at that time was not going to be the leader of that organization throughout my entire life here in Memphis. And many of those leaders would transition within 5 to 10 years, and that became exactly true. And so what we did is thinking through is like, all right, it's not just maximizing our current leadership and catalyzing that leadership to actually more efficiently work together, but we have to recruit the next generation of leaders that impact the city. Yeah. And so in thinking through that, I'm sitting here thinking, it's like, I don't know who's going to be the next Scott Morris, right? And even talking to Dr. Morris in 2010 and 2011, 2012, when we had these all these different lunches and conversations together, I would ask him, like, who's going to take over when you retire, and who's whatever, and he would say, I have no idea, all that kind of stuff. And my goal wasn't to be an executive headhunting firm for, well, call me when you want to do it and we'll go find someone. Mm-hmm. My thought was, what if Memphis was packed with passionate, caring 20-somethings who had high potential to love their community in a network of people, right? And so then the thought was, how do we get as many high capacity, high caring, highly thoughtful, loving 20-somethings to live in our city as possible? And so that was part of our thesis of that our organization wouldn't just be developing current leaders and catalyzing. We're recruiting the next generation, but not recruiting specifically. We're recruiting in abundance. And the thought is that if those 20-somethings are here, and then if we can keep them here and make them fall in love with the city, that it will work out well for Memphis from 2020 and beyond, or now as we talk 2030 to 2050, we think about as that next generation of stuff. And so that was our bigger picture. And Church Health came into play in that because of Church Health scholars. Dr. Morris had told me over lunch one day, we have 20 funded positions. We had 13 applications. We accepted 11. Only 9 showed up. I've got we got to fill this program. Why are we whatever? And I was like, well, let's tell the story. David Montague at Memphis Teacher Residency. The next week we had a lunch. I've got 60 funded spots. Only 40 people of the 300 that applied are qualified. I need better quality of applications.
Interesting, yeah.
And there were several of those kind of things happening, and I was like, well, what if we could create a bigger recruiting process, a better storytelling? How do we get more quality and quantity of applicants for all these different kinds of programs? And that was the genesis of Choose 901, and that was mainly for social work and education training programs like MTR and TFA. But getting to your question about Teach for America is that Choose 901 exploded almost unexpectedly to another level than we anticipated, and there's a bigger story around all the backstory in that. But within about 8 months of its genesis, we were approached by a ton of schools, a ton of school leaders about recruiting for a bunch of teacher-specific positions. And the reality was that we were recruiting for 8 or 9 different types of kind of community social work kind of stuff. But it was organizations that were hiring 40 things that are the same, 20 things are the same, 30 things are the same, whatever. All the different teaching positions had so many different things. And so it was like, man, this website's not going to work with 9 general things and then just here's another 300 teaching jobs. You're going to lose the focus of that kind of stuff. Yeah. So we had to break it out and make it its own thing to really list those things together as Teach 901. And so when we took the teachers over here, we listed it as Teach 901. So it's a subdivision of Choose 901. But we could get really granular with, we need a 7th grade science teacher or a 10th grade math teacher at this specific school, at this specific thing. And so that really helped. But in addition to that, what we really found is as we studied that, looking at other communities, Memphis was going through the big charter school explosion at that moment. And other cities who had gone through that 5-10 years prior, where there hadn't been catalyzation and trust among those charter networks. If you went to a New Orleans at that time, or a San Antonio or an Atlanta, those places that were ahead of us in the charter world, you could drive down the interstate and there would be 40 different billboards for 40 different schools talking about why you should come teach at those schools, where all these schools were competitively competing against each other. Schools were spending a lot of money on hiring a chief marketing officer and spending tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, trying to market against each other to get these teachers to bring in. And I just kind of forecasted out a future where I was like, if we don't solve that right now, if we don't get these schools to trust a place right now where that can all be true, we're going to end up spending a large percentage of our education budget fighting for the exact same people instead of creating more stuff. And what's interesting is Teach 901 went live in 2013. Here we are 11 years later. Just last night, we actually hosted a Teach 901 job fair where 35 different schools came and brought tables and recruited together and did all that kind of stuff. They post all their jobs at the same website, all that kind of stuff. Every single person that signs up, every single school gets the same names. And what we realize is that we're like, when you collaborate like that, I mean, you drive around this town. Mm-hmm. When's the last time you've seen a billboard recruiting a teacher?
I can't remember the last time.
You can't remember it. And people don't realize that cities that don't have that collaboration, they fight over it. You can drive around town right now and you can see billboards for warehouse workers at FedEx and warehouse workers at Amazon, or different employees over here and this whatever.
Sure.
You can go do whatever. And don't get me wrong, it's not that they post jobs on their website, they post them on ours. It's free. Mm-hmm. It doesn't cost them anything. They can post on other websites, and it's not that we can provide every single one. But what we've done is that we've provided such a margin for collaboration and trust that allows them to realize that. And we just started talking a lot around, hey, teachers are rare in our culture now, right? There's not enough teachers, accountants, engineers, and nurses to go around. They can teach in any city they want. They can nurse in any city they want, and you can do accounting and engineering almost anywhere in the world now that you want. And so I always saw it like kind of like musical chairs. Teaching's like there's 10 chairs, there's 7 teachers, the music plays, and when it stops, they sit wherever they want. And if they don't want to sit in your chair, they won't. And that means your chair is empty, Right. And how we experience that as a community is oversized classrooms or long-term subs who aren't accredited, or, people who aren't prepared, whatever. And our children are the ones who lose out. And what people don't realize is there's not enough teachers coming along. So next round, there's 11 chairs and there's actually only 6 people playing the game. And it's going to get worse. And so if we don't focus on teacher retention, then we're going to lose out, because every city, every municipality in the country needs a 7th grade science teacher. We're not unique to that. Yeah. And so a lot of our collaboration is trying to go like, hey, I really love teaching science, but this charter school or this school doesn't necessarily work for me. What are the other options? And creating a lot of freedom, being like, hey, we're so glad you're still a teacher, and go to this other place where that culture, that philosophy, that leadership works with your personality. So that way there's still only one 7th grade science teacher opening instead of that person bailing on this, going to some other city or some whatever, and now we have 2. You see what I'm saying? And so creating that collaboration is a really, really big strategy, and it's working. Now, there's still not enough teachers out there. So like every partner I talked to last night was like, how are we going to fill all these spots? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, and there's some other big issues in our state and nationally, and just kind of, all these, there's a lot of unions and a lot of issues that create a bunch of different things. But for what we have, we're maximizing as a community like nowhere else. It's probably the most common city, mayor, school district phone call, email I get every week is, how did you pull that off? Will you come to our city and do it too?
The funny thing is, as you were talking and describing that, and I really appreciate you taking the time, I had no idea. I mean, I vaguely knew, but that amount of specificity is actually really, really fascinating to me. My wife works at Crosstown High on this very floor here at Crosstown Concourse. So I hear about school issues, and I'm a father of 3 kids. So like I've dealt with these issues as a parent as well. So that's really fascinating. But isn't that isn't collaboration the Memphis way? It's like if you look at it stacks like the DNA of collaboration that isn't normal is kind of in our DNA. That kind of like way to find a way when there's no way, or whatever the phrase is.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of like Southern kind of like, hospitality, that plays into that. I think there's a little bit of like, well, we've kind of historically realized there's not enough of some sort of ingredient, so if we're not thoughtful, kind of through it. But I think the biggest thing that plays into that's made that part of Memphis's history in multiple different platforms is that we are a city that has big city amenities, but we still have this very hometown kind of networked culture.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so people who get around the table and think about advocating for teachers are oftentimes very connected with, or even, the same person, or are married to, or work with, or shared stuff with people who are advocating for parks, or who are working on, working at the chamber, advocating for businesses, or whatever those kind of things are. And so there's a lot of connection. And I think Memphis is small enough to be able to see how all these things kind of work together. There's definitely more room for better collaboration, for sure. I think that's definitely something I'd like to see. But
always more you can do.
Always more we can do. I think we'd probably go back and look at Stacks, and the day of, they'd probably be like, golly, if we could get these musicians to whatever, what could we accomplish? Like, there's probably more. They would probably look back. They're so grateful for what they did, and I would say yes, that is true for us right now. But I think I'm still more hopeful that we can actually inspire more people to take the time to collaborate and be engaged in that. That's where we'd say our catalytic work. And I'd say catalytic work is all based on trust. The only reason Stacks work is because people trusted each other beyond just being a good musician. But they created trust that wasn't normally anticipated or expected. And they took the time to assume the best of someone else and allow trust to actually grow. And I think
that's what y'all are doing.
And I think that's what we need, and more of in every culture and in every season, and there's never enough of it, is assuming the best of the other person and giving a chance for the other person, group, organization to build that trust and see where there can be efficiency in that.
As you're sitting here talking, I'm realizing, so I go to St. Patrick's downtown, and I'm in the choir. Yeah. And here we are in recording this in Holy Week, so we've been practicing a lot. Anyway, there's a young math teacher from Kingsbury who just moved to Memphis, and she's
most diverse school in the whole state. Yeah.
She is teaching through Memphis Teacher Residency,
of course.
So, and on spring break, her boyfriend, and they're planning on getting married. He came down and he just sat in with the tenor section. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to be moving down here in May, and you're going to have another tenor in the choir." So it's kind of interesting. It's like not only do we have a young, idealistic, optimistic young math teacher at Kingsbury who moved down here from, I think she's moved here from Ohio, but she's got a trailing boyfriend who's, and they've got so much energy for our city. So it's interesting. You talked in the kind of abstract about having a cadre, an army of 20 somethings that are passionate about the city, but it's like, but now I've got a soprano in my choir named Maria, who's got a lovely singing voice and so much passion for Memphis.
Well, and what's so interesting about that, too, to connect some of these dots. So Choose 901 was trying to answer for people who wanted to do things like MTR and TFA and Church Health Scholars and others, is we weren't actually like recruiting in the sense of those people wouldn't call me and I'd be like, hey, yeah, would you be a good person, whatever. We were just trying to be a marketing funnel in that. And we were trying to answer this simple question. Is that the people who want to make a difference in their community, especially in that kind of seasonal gap year kind of stuff post-college, what they want to do is I want to make a difference, but will I enjoy going to this place I've never lived in before, or maybe even coming back to after college or staying, whatever, will I enjoy it in this season of life? They want to invest their life, but they also want to enjoy it. And so what Choose 901, what we were trying to communicate is, hey, here are options to invest your life. Like, we didn't actually try to convince anyone to invest their life. The reality is that there are plenty of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors in college who want to do the programs we have. They just don't know they exist. They're looking for a place to invest their life. It's a race to be the thing, whatever. But then once they find it, they have to assume that they're going to enjoy it. And so that's why we talk about wings and parks and music festivals and all these other kinds of things.
Sure.
Because they want to imagine how to live here. Well, the reality, though, is especially when we started, we were recruiting millennials, and now we're in Gen Z and even already talking about Gen Alpha. But like millennials, different from their parents who are boomers, they don't move individually. They move in packs and they move with friends. So the reality was that I want somebody to come do Teach for America here. Well, if their boyfriend or girlfriend or roommate or somebody, whatever, if that person wants to be an engineer or an accountant or whatever, if you don't have an opportunity for that person, then you're going to lose the teacher or the healthcare worker or whatever, because every city needs teachers, healthcare workers, mentor, all that kind of stuff. So you had to actually offer both options. So we very quickly added to Choose 901 a job board.
Makes sense.
The Choose 901 job board is actually, not only is it daily the most trafficked page on our website, it is one of the most trafficked paged in a 500-mile radius of Memphis, right? I mean, it is wildly active. But we filter it by, we don't put jobs on there that are like hourly, like part-time hourly worker at Burger King. And we also don't put the CFO position at AutoZone. Because who we're looking at is, who are these 20-somethings, maybe 30-something, what kind of positions would they be interested in? And how do we curate that and create that page and create that kind of stuff so that when your friend who's in the choir with you as an MTR worker is thinking about that and she sees this on Choose 901, she's got to be able to go to her boyfriend and go, I think I'm going to move to Memphis and I'm going to do this 4-year thing, and whatever he's involved in, whatever that is, accountant or engineer or whatever, finance, he's like, well, what would I do?
Exactly, yeah.
And we've got to be able to answer that question. So when they're signing up for that or whatever, we're immediately saying, hey, thanks so much for your interest in MTR. Do you have friends who or whatever? Not only do we tell them about our job board page, we also say, you have a friend who's interested in med school? They should check out Church Health, and they can thinking like they can live together. They can the strategy behind that. And so many people see Choose 901, they see the cool T-shirts, and they see they find out where to get some wings, but they don't realize and that's the whole design. The design is it's designed to actually shape and scope behavioral economics in a way that people don't feel it. But that's what we're actually trying to do, is thinking through all those other different kind of levers and through that.
Yeah, you have to anticipate their needs, and it's almost like you have to build this kind of smorgasbord of offerings, and you're building it from stuff that's already available. I mean, not that you don't have programmatic stuff that you would create yourselves, but like a lot of it's already existing elsewhere, and it's kind of like putting that together in a way that kind of like is a suite of offerings that's easy to navigate and easy to understand, so that you can make life decisions.
Exactly.
Talk a little bit more about, you talked briefly about like the wings and the festivals, but like I feel like, and maybe this is getting into the like deeper backstory of Choose 901 and its explosive growth. I remember when that happened, and it was a time a lot of people in Memphis were talking Memphis Renaissance, and I was one of those guys. A lot was happening in Memphis, and I feel like the Choose 901 brand hit at a time where everyone wanted to go grab the thing that says, I believe in this city, right? So can you talk a little bit about how, maybe a little bit at the outset, but more broadly, how marketing Memphis as a place where you can contribute and have fun sets up everything else? Because like, you want them to choose some options and choose to move here, but how do you use Memphis culture and just everything that's great about Memphis to kind of like say that's why you want to be here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one, I just want to say this: I moved here in 2004. I did not move here. I did not move to Memphis for Memphis because of Memphis, but I didn't move here thinking that Memphis was a bad place. Mm-hmm. I didn't think it was necessarily a good place. I just assumed that it was a place where I could start a company. I moved here to be a part of a startup company, and so I moved here for that. And honestly, I mean, when I was moving, I'm from Tennessee, but I'd been living in Dallas for a while. When I was coming across the bridge, like I was thinking out loud, like, all right, I'm gonna be here for a year or two, and then I'm gonna move someplace cool. And so when I got here, I was not moving for this place and thinking anything necessarily about it. But I didn't think anything bad about it either. And so
you were open.
I was totally open, but I had zero expectations. And I would say is that when we were unloading the U-Haul truck, a neighbor comes out. He's like saying, "Oh, where are you coming? Blah blah blah. Why'd you move here?" And it was all this kind of negative speak of like whatever. I'm like, "Well, why do you live here?" And they're like, "Well, I'm from here." And I'm like, what? Like, wait a second. Like, should I have not moved here? Like, what's that? I didn't know anything bad till literally minutes into living in Memphis. That someone tells me something bad about it. And the reality is that my experience though over the next 6-8 months was completely different. Like just, and I happened to get a place in Midtown, and it just happened to work for me, kind of whatever. But just the experience that I had was way better than what I just experienced in Dallas. Dallas had every option up possible, but zero community. Like I could go do everything, but I never ran into someone I knew. I never bumped into whatever. I could do anything with complete strangers that I wanted to. And I grew up in a small town in Tennessee where there was nothing to do. I was totally bored. There wasn't like all these great options. I knew everybody, whatever. And we were like, what are we going to do? What are we dreaming about? Whatever. And so like I had this kind of hometown experience of like what am I going to do with my life? I had this Dallas, like, I can do anything. Who are y'all? Like, no one cares about me. No one cares if I was there. I didn't care if any of these other people were there. I never saw the same people at any sort of things twice. Like, and so when I got to Memphis and I realized that I could like go to the grocery store and go to Cafe Eclectic and go to my church and go to the FedEx Forum and see a game and go watch a sunset, over the river and bump into 60% of the same people at different kinds of ways and different kinds of ways. Like, it's like, what is going on here? Like, it's coincidence. And then it all of a sudden knows like, oh, no, it's not coincidence. It's Memphis.
Yeah.
And so I got really kind of obsessed with that pretty quick. I was like, wow. I was like, there's plenty to all these kind of things. Like, I want to be able to talk about this. And so then everybody was around me was kind of like, whoa, like you've kind of like really liked this place. And I'm like, no, don't you see it? Like, it's kind of whatever. But I think some people just didn't have the same experience as I. They were here. They just were inoculated to it. They had only been in one or the other, so they still hadn't experienced a really big city, or they had never grown up in a little town. So they just didn't have those other kind of pieces, where I'd had the porridge too cold and too hot, you know what I'm saying? And so, so I kind of found my porridge, so to speak. And so when I was being able to talk about that Memphis is kind of whatever. What I know now that I didn't even know then, when, in 2011, September of 2011 is when I was having these meetings with people who were looking for people. In October of 2011 is when I came up with the idea for Choose 901 and actually named it in my head, but I didn't tell anybody. We went through this naming process, but I just hoped that everybody would kind of pick the name that I wanted. But even when I was thinking through it, the name Choose actually came from a letter that Dr. Morris wrote that you actually probably had a hand in, putting it in the front of the Pat the playbill, with Pat Halloran at the Orpheum. And I'd gone to see a play and whatever.
That.
And he wrote a thing about how he chose to live in Memphis. And at the same time, A.C. Wharton was running for mayor, and he was talking about, like, this is a city of choice. And I was like,
I remember that. Oh, this is interesting.
And so I said, man, I was like, that's the word. I was like, you're choosing, you're actively engaging and choosing this place. Now, why would you choose it? And so that was the messaging that we're kind of getting to, is like, you kind of choose it. And so Memphis has plenty of problems, but what people don't realize is that, like, when I was in Dallas, like, all those problems that we talk about here were all happening there. It's just happening in the context of 5 million people. So it's like there's more poverty, more crime, more murders, more whatever in Dallas, like just statistically because it's Dallas's DFW, right? Memphis, whatever. More numbers that were actually happening there, but it's just so spread out that you could be away from, you could live in Dallas and never be exposed to poverty. Like you could live your whole life and never do that. Whereas in Memphis, that's not really possible. And so, like, people are confronted by poverty every single day, and they're confronted by their own experiences of what does it mean about my wealth if I can experience life around this close in proximity to poverty. Whereas in Dallas, you could be 10x wealthier and never experience poverty. So you're never confronted with that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
And if you don't watch the news, you would never even know about, some of these kind of things. So, like, what was happening was as we started looking at that, it was going, wait a second, is this a problem with this city, or is in globally kind of looking at whatever, is this a place where leaders would be attracted? Like leaders who want to make a difference, leaders of lost causes, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
That want to impact their community. Like, well, where do you want to go? Well, I want to go where I can make a difference.
Right.
Well, here's the reality. If you go to my hometown where I grew up, there's not enough problem to really feel like it's worth dedicating your life to. Don't get me wrong. There's crime, there's issues, there's even homelessness and kind of whatever. But it's going to feel so small that you're kind of like, why are we putting all this energy and effort into just kind of whatever? But if you go to Dallas, it's too big, it's too disjointed, it's too whatever. Like if you went to Dallas, or obviously let's just take homelessness in New York. There's hundreds of agencies just addressing homelessness right now in New York, and they can't grapple their hands around it.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if somebody really wanted to, and I'm not, this isn't disparaging to anyone dealing with homelessness in Memphis, but just saying is that, like, if we wanted to solve homelessness in Memphis, it's solvable. It's at a scale. It's a significant problem that would matter in your life and would matter to other people.
Yeah.
But if the right leaders, whatever, kind of just said, all right, we're not just going to say we're this big. We're just going to solve it. Like, it's actually solvable. And that thing, I think, gets me really fired up as a leader to think, like, what if we could attract those kind of leaders to come address problems that are not unique to Memphis? They are problems that are, common for every major city in the world. If you're going to figure it out, you got to figure it out at a place where it's big enough to figure out those kind of solutions, but small enough where you could actually solve it. Like, Chicago's never going to solve their murder stuff, never going to solve their crime stuff. But if you wanted to solve how that drastically is reduced, you should come to Memphis. And because Memphis is at the right size and scale where leaders could actually address the issue. And if you solve it here, you create the blueprint to how to solve it in Chicago, how to solve it in LA, how to solve it, in Singapore. And that is really interesting, inspiring, not just on the negative things, but on the positive things. Like, how do you solve bike lanes? How do you solve, whatever, funding things or creating neighborhoods or different kind of stuff? Like, we're at the right scale size where it can be significant and possible, and you could pilot things and you could multiply it where it's actually is a 5X, 10X problem someplace else. And that, I think, is worth putting down the front lines and saying, hey, Memphis has problems just like everywhere else. We have enough front line space where if you want to make a difference, come get engaged and we'll celebrate that.
The front line space, just to echo on that, I think to myself, I always viewed it as like, I'm the type of person that's wired to, I don't want to live in a city that's got everything perfectly tricked out. That's kind of the reason I don't like to be in suburbs. Apologies, no diss to suburbanites, but it's just like, when everything is perfectly built out by a computer and the parking lots are all, it's like, I like, what I love about Memphis and what I love about living in Memphis is that there was, and when I was kind of like late 30s, early 40s, and I'd spent some time away. We lived in DeKalb, Illinois, while Sarah went to graduate school. And so I had just enough of a kind of cleanse the palate moment to where when I came back, I saw Memphis with a fresh perspective. And I was like, oh, wow, FedEx Forum happened while we were gone, So, but Memphis had an open seat at the table of leadership, and you could just pull up a seat and get started. It really was wide open enough for you to make an impact. And I don't think that every city is like that. And I've had people on, friends who lived in Portland, Oregon, and talked about, and she did some incredible work at some incredible agencies. I'm not putting down Portland or anything, but to your point, the problem is overwhelmingly, mind-numbingly enormous, right? Whereas I think in Memphis, not only is the problem by virtue of size a little bit more manageable, you can kind of know your neighbor and just get started on something. It's not impossible to kind of insinuate yourself, right?
Yeah, and to get started, and for it to feel like it can be big and significant. I think Dr. Morris, again, is a good example of this. There's
a great example.
There's actually a bunch of examples, but Dr. Morris, obviously from Atlanta and had gone off to school and came back a different guy, whatever. But when he's thinking about addressing, poverty in healthcare, there's actually one example. The clear example is him coming to Memphis and them now serving 70,000 people a year, is so significant for our community and for whatever. But but if you go to Dallas, he probably doesn't grow it that big because it doesn't matter to Dallas as much. Or they view it as a failure because, well, we've got 300,000 people in this category that need help and you're only serving 70,000.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point.
And so the problem's so big is that it does whatever. Now, but by him coming here, he's able to grow it and scale it, and it's the national example for how every community should do it.
It really is.
And you can grow it, You could scale it bigger the way he does it. You could take the blueprint and you could say, let's do this, but 5x larger. Let's do this at 30% of the size. And those two things are exactly true. And it's this huge blessing that every major city in the country, if we had 50 mayors in this room, which actually, there's 25 mayors here in town meeting with Paul Young, from all over whatever. Yeah. But like, if we had the 50 major city mayors in this room right now, and I said, hey, if you could rub a genie and have 3 wishes, would one of them be for a church health in your community? They would say yes. They would immediately want a healthy church health because they would beg for this solution. So like, people are like, hey, this is an incredible solution. Where did the solution come from, though? We think, you think it's like, oh, it's Dr. Morris and his just will to make this thing and keep multiplying and keep fighting for the justice, whatever. But there's something that precluded him actually picking Memphis. Mm-hmm. And you know what this is, but when I remind you of it, it's all of a sudden the green light's going to come on.
Yeah.
It was negative press around Memphis. Mm-hmm. Dr. Morris's story, he tells it all the time, whatever. He says, I read in a magazine that Memphis was the poorest city in the country. And if I wanted to go serve the poor, then I should go whatever. Now, back up. All the way back to whatever year he read that, 1986, 1987, whatever year that was. He's reading this story. He's looking for a place to go address poverty. He finds a thing. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a list of all the poorest cities. Memphis is number 1. I'm picking Memphis. And because Memphis is listed number 1, not number 2, not number 6, not number 10, not on the list, we get church health. Mm-hmm. And our city is blessed for decades past and to future to come because of it. If whatever other city, San Antonio or Oklahoma City would have been number 1, they would have gotten church health. Mm-hmm. That's the truth, right?
Yeah.
At the exact same time, he's wherever reading that magazine in Atlanta. I promise you, there was a room of Chamber of Commerce folks and CEOs and executives and people at home who just came home from a day at work who opened that same magazine and said, this city, poor, why are they giving all this bad press? Why are they doing all these negative things? Why do they got to talk about why we're always so bad? Why can't they just put all the good things we do about the city? Why do we have to be number 1? Why do I even live here?
Yeah.
And they're saying all the negative things and feeling that moment, and they have no realize that the same thing that they're upset about is inspiring something that's going to radically change hundreds of thousands of people's lives and impact the way cities do working healthcare across our nation because of one negative press. And I want to say, back to that kind of thing, the same way that we do it, the negative things about Memphis, we put them out there and say, hey, we got big problems here, and we need big leaders to solve them. Who wants it?
Yeah.
Not as a shame, but as a feature of attracting the kind of leaders you want in this community.
The leaders who want to be there at a place like that. Yeah.
I want 50 more Scott Morrises, and to have that, we're going to have to publicize our needs as much as we publicize our wants to get those people here. And
to your point, a part of that origin story and I worked at Church Health for 13 years, so I've heard Dr. Morris speak many times. Part of it was he was from Atlanta. He said, but Atlanta had gotten too big, and so I think there wasn't also a manageability. Maybe he didn't even know exactly why that would help him. And of course, he came here, as he says, selling out of an empty cart. And of course, the Memphis community embraced him. And truth be told, Church Health gives a replication workshop, so people seek out how did you do it here in Memphis. And again, I think that goes back to, that's not uncommon in Memphis to solve a problem in a novel way.
Right.
So I think that's the work that you all have going on here at City Leadership, and you've helped me see how kind of like your own kind of personal experience of Memphis kind of gave way to those first initial solutions. And then it's really interesting to see how it has grown and become more specific. Teachers is a perfect example about something you really want to highlight and really hyper-focus on because it's such an urgent need. So as we wrap it up here, I was thinking, take a look out 5 years into the future, maybe even 10, but not much beyond that, and root yourself in this current moment. We do have a new mayor in Paul Young. We have the composition of the city council has changed a little bit. So I feel like we're at an inflection point. I'm starting to get a similar feeling because we moved back to Memphis in 04. So I remember what kind of fresh eyes on 2004 looked like. And it was kind of wide open. And then I get kind of settled into my job at Church Health. And then everything starts to happen. And then I found my own slot on how to lead, et cetera. But what do you think the opportunity is now? City leadership has been around 15 years? Or y'all have reached 15
years. Yeah.
14 years. What's the next 5 to 10 years of city leadership look like? And in the context of Memphis and where it's sitting right now.
Yeah. So, when I started city leadership in 2010, I actually owned a for-profit, and that was actually my day-to-day job. And I did this as like a passion. Mm-hmm. And by 2016, I sold that company and went all in here. But the goal for city leadership originally was to spend a decade of my life helping build optimism in the city through helping the good guys do more good, right? Like telling their good news stories, helping them do more good, maximizing the optimism, and then just believing that there'd be a tipping point of optimism in Memphis. And actually, statistically, we measured in 2011 and continued measuring throughout that time. Like Memphis had never been more optimistic about itself right before COVID than ever in history. Mm-hmm. Like all that was happening. And it wasn't just us. It was like you were saying earlier, that inflection point of, the economy and the Grizzlies. And I've got a lot more other beliefs around how, there's kind of that moment of the darkest day in Memphis of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination delayed so much growth that led to a moment where there was just a lot of capital growth from 80s and 90s that was playing out at the season that we were kind of going. And so that kind of led to this big moment. Obviously, COVID, put the brakes on a lot of things here, especially fragile cities like us, but a lot of other places. But city leadership was going to end in 2020. We actually started with what we called a supernova date. And the goal was that I didn't want to ever start it as a retirement plan for anybody else. And so many other nonprofits I'd seen as like people just kind of clinging on, trying to have relevance and kind of whatever. I was like, man, if we start with an end date, then we're just every day we have one less day to do the work. Mm-hmm. And the board asked me, in 2018 when I was in the process of thinking about what next company to start, if I would stay for longer. And ultimately kind of said, well, if I'm gonna stay for longer, we're gonna be done by 2020. Like we don't need to keep doing this. Like the city believes in itself now. It's okay. Like we can move on. And they're like, well, if you were to stay, what would you do? And I was like, well, they're like, well, if we wanted to keep this org going, what thing would you write out for the next person? And I spent 6 months kind of dreaming and thinking through that because we've been a project-based organization. We had taken on projects for orgs, kind of help solve it and kind of catalyze the work and different kind of things in those kind of ways. And there was going to be a big process of trying to think through passing batons and did we keep, these websites open or not and that kind of stuff. And I started to think about all these different projects, whatever. And what we realized was there was a lot of schools that we've been working with for a lot of different various reasons, but they were producing high school graduates. And as we were helping the schools market for students and teachers, what we started to realize more and more and more is that the kids, even though they were 100% high school graduation rate, 100% college acceptance rate, they were still really, really fragile in those first years out of high school and not persisting through their education hopes and dreams as we had hoped. Mm-hmm. And you could see that in 17, 18, 19 in our survey kind of stuff. We were like, man, this isn't good. And then as we were looking at that, through that kind of stuff, what we also found was the ones who were persisting and actually either finding the career they wanted or getting the education they wanted, 2/3 of those people were actually choosing to have at least this early season of their life in some other city. And I thought, my goodness, like this community has spent 18 years helping educate, mentor, build these systems and schools and teachers and whatever. And and just from education alone, a lot of these kids have had $200,000 each invested into them just through this sort of process, not counting every other kind of service or whatever. And then to think about, either they weren't able to pay it off, for themselves, which actually led to greater depression rates, and because they were told they were going to succeed, but it was just ended up being really hard, or success rates were leaving town. I thought either we're not paying off on our investment internally, or we're exporting the ones who are, or whatever. I was like, that's not going to play out. And just our core 6 school clients, we're going to have 5,000 plus alumni by 2030. And I thought, man, what if we change the game from recruiting college graduates to helping persistence of career and college pursuit for these high school graduates through this process, and then get them to choose 901 and help them engage the community, use all our networks and leverage and that kind of stuff.
It's another piece of the linkage.
Yes. So I got convinced around that idea. I pitched that idea to our board, and then I begged them to let me be the executive director for the next decade for that pursuit. And we started Choose 901 Alumni. So if you graduate from one of our 6 partner schools, like I wish it could do every school, but you just can't afford that. And, you do for some what you wish you could do for all. I think, as more funding comes in and more stuff, I'm sure we'll bring in more people. But over 400 kids or adults graduate from high school a year and enter into our 10-year Choose 901 alumni program. We have over 2,200 alumni right now.
Wow, okay.
And
I saw that on your website, but I didn't know how long that had been going.
Right.
Okay.
And so, man, what we have found is that college persistence is up 6x, college attainment is up 4x. Retention in Memphis has gone from 30% with a degree to over 80% with a degree. We're using all of our stuff to get whatever. And we believe that most of the over 85% of these kids were in poverty during their K through 12 experience. So you're flipping that narrative, right? Like if you're born in poverty in the United States, only 16% are out of poverty by age of 30. In Memphis, that number is 6%. In the zip codes where our kids come from, it's 1%. So you've grown up in a place for the last 40 years. 100% of the people there are in poverty, and only 1 out of 100 are ever getting out of poverty for the last 40 years. And now what we're seeing is just in our first 5 years from high school graduation to 23, we're experiencing a 58% out of poverty rate. It's smashing the national averages and different kinds of stuff. And all it is not about anything, whatever. All it is about, hey, you going to college? Hey, you sign up for classes? Hey, you want to come back home and intern? Hey, you want to get a job? Hey, you need some network? Hey, you want to get plugged in? And it's just text, a couple of phone calls, some parties, kind of using relationships and just being a friend through that process. And it's been incredible. And so our hope is to create a tipping point on that. There's 40,000 of the 110,000 kids in K through 12 right now are in significant poverty. So about 5,000 of those kids will end up coming through this program. So again, it's not everybody, but it is. No one's ever tried to actually not just help them get prepared for a college and career, but actually guide them through it and recruit them back and plug them in.
Wow. Yeah.
And getting them to choose 901 means that at 28 years old, they're still living here and they're engaged, and they don't view this place as a place to consume and criticize, but they view it as a place to create and cultivate. And we drill that in their head from the time that we first start meeting with them in their junior year of high school. Like, hey, you're the future of the city. What that means is you're going to create and cultivate here. We want you to learn how to love your neighbors, you love yourself, how do you take initiative for the benefit of others, and how you can have a blast while you do it. Yeah. That's Choose 901. So we want you to be here. So we help guide them through that process. Additionally, we're bringing up volunteers, mentors, advocates on this other side in our Give 901 program. Yeah. So we've created a give 1 hour of pay, 1 hour of time every month to giving back. And so if you make $15 an hour sweeping warehouse, give $15 a month. If you make $42 an hour, as a senior accountant at Ozone, give $42 a month. But give back, be a part of that, and grow into that space. And our goal is to have 5,000 donors, monthly donors, by 2030 as well. And we have parties, interconnect, mentorship, engagements. And our hope is that those 10,000 families create another tipping point for Memphis for 2030 to 2050. That's our big goal right now. Nobody knows. I mean, not something we put on our website, no whatever, kind of whatever. But our big goal is hoping that radically changes. And I just want to live in a Memphis where that's true, and then just see what those people do. I get out of their way.
Yeah.
Like if that's true in 2030, then I think like, okay, well then I probably could live here the rest of my life, because who knows what the heck all those Marvin Stockwells and Scott Morrises are going to do with the rest of their lives in that space, and how they believe in one each other and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's our big goal.
Your job is really just to equip and connect folks, and be that glue. Some people don't know the next step to go take. I mean, it's really that simple. The last thing that you described, the kind of the last evolution of y'all's mission and work, that's really exciting and it portends well for Memphis. So you've done an excellent job of kind of like saying, like, here's how we started, here's what we learned, and I'll be honest, I didn't know that last piece. Like that is kind of flown over my head because I hadn't engaged with that. So, gosh, if how can people support your work, and is there anything you want to say in closing, websites you want to rattle off, or just kind of
I'd say in closing is that, like, hey man, assume the best of Memphis, and start acting like, hey, our preferred future is possible. Like, what if you woke up tomorrow and thought your preferred future for your community is possible? How would you act and live and do? Whatever that is. That doesn't mean you got to come to my website, subscribe to my stuff, or give to me. Mm-hmm. And it's not giving to me, right? It's like giving to this purpose and that kind of stuff. Nonprofit, right? It's like, how much money you raise, your salary doesn't change. Yeah. It's like, it's not about me. But it really is about giving in that space. And so, so I think if people acted like their preferred future was possible, what does that look like to them? And if every single person in Memphis did that, we'd be just fine. Now, assuming that we're a little ways off from that, how can people immediately get involved? I think, for every time that they hear something negative about Memphis, instead of just repeating that first, trying to figure out, all right, what is something that is positive about Memphis that I can share and believe and whatever, and just start talking about the positive. I just really want to encourage people, there's so many good stories. It's true. Share them. And if you don't know any, then you're not either subscribed to the right social media or emails or in the right conversations or going to the right things. So it's on you to try to get access to those so you can get filled. Because if you're just filled with negative, then that's fine. But, saying that you know those negative things, but you got to balance it out. It's like a healthy diet, whatever. And I would say even on the other side, it's like if you only know positive and you don't know some of the realities of the hard things, like you need to learn about those as well. So don't just, not look at that kind of stuff, but have it balance. And then making sure you're talking about the positive, through that, like making that an effort, whether that's at work or at home or however that is definitely on social media. Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to us, like obviously, Choose 901, a lot of people know about, and they engage in different ways. And I want people to know, like when they buy merch and when they share our stuff, like it fuels this bigger mission, and we love that. But like Give 901 is available for individuals and for corporate. So like we have corporate payroll deduction programs. We offer volunteer stuff, everything from sight words with second graders and lunch with middle schoolers, and to resume workshops with college students and hiring interns. So we have 240 college students in our job portal right now looking for internships and full-time jobs in Memphis. Like, who needs talent? Like, right? And who wants to hire strategically and hire somebody who's going to get a text message from somebody on our team every week going, are you going to work? Are you doing a great job? Are you making yourself proud? Are you making your company proud? Like, that's an added benefit to taking the risk of, of hiring some of our team. And so so getting involved in that way. And then, I think the other side is not just investing in Memphis, but we're always just a big advocate. Mm-hmm. Go enjoy Memphis. Go see a sunset this weekend over Easter over the river, because this is one of the best sunsets in the whole world. It's right? True. Like go get some of the best food, from Gray's or from takeout, from a place like Iris, or lunch sandwiches from Fino's, and go to the park and enjoy it, or go be with family, and then go out and go out to dinner with your family. Mm-hmm. Go find live music. Go do something and just be really like grateful that you get to be in this place. And if anything, take some friends or family with you.
Yeah. John Carroll, thank you so much for being on Champions of the Lost Causes. I really appreciate it.
Hey, man, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for doing it.